Hello, global gardeners. Sorry for that delay. I heard my phone dinging and dinging and dinging and dinging, and I went to check on it because I suddenly noticed my internet was gone. And of course, my service provider was notifying me that they were working in the area with some issue. Hopefully, they got it resolved much quicker than they estimated. So, we're going to start the show today, and hopefully it'll go through the normal length. If I should happen to cut out and not come back, it's purely an internet issue, and I apologize for that ahead of time. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the end of season. I've been looking at the chat on my phone since I wasn't able to be here, and this is kind of what's happening. Shandy's Garden says, hey, everyone, it's been an amazing, nice, chilly time around here in Cincinnati. And that's what got me thinking about doing this kind of show today, because we've had some chilly days. Over the weekend, just actually, it was on Friday, I guess it was, I woke up to 39 degrees Fahrenheit. That is about 4 degrees Celsius. That's cold. It wasn't forecast to get that cold. In fact, I knew a cool day was coming, and luckily I closed up my greenhouse overnight. I normally leave my greenhouse open this time of year because the temperatures are dropping down and staying relatively warm at night, but I happened to close up my greenhouse, and I'm glad I did, because here in Colorado, and for many of you, like in Ohio, for example, suddenly the cool weather is beginning to appear. We're still going to have warm days. We're still going to be able to get out in the garden, but we have to start thinking about the end of the season and what that really means and what kind of activities we need to do to prepare for the first frost, to prepare for cleaning up our garden, to prepare for, and I hate to say this, winter. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And of course, for all of the wonderful people who are looking forward to the warming days of spring, there's a lot of similarities. Some of these activities that we do to put our garden to rest going into fall and winter are pretty much the same, or at least similar to some of the activities that we would be doing in spring to get ready for the growing season ahead. So we'll talk about that. I definitely want to hear about what's happening with you. Rick says it is a sunny 25 degrees Celsius down under. And let's see, that equates to about 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So a nice day. That's good. That's warming. That is actually pretty much the same temperature that I'm supposed to have today and the next couple of days, slightly warmer than that. So even though I had the cold temperatures overnight this weekend, we're warming back up. That's typical of me. It's to have about 25 to 27 Celsius, about 77 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit at this time of year. That's normal for me. But I can see it coming, because normal for me here in Colorado is to have a first frost at the end of September or beginning of October. And that is fast approaching. So we're just going to have to wait and see what is going to happen as we move forward. And so it's going to be 93 Fahrenheit for bless this water. That's about 34 Celsius. So we're all over the map, and many of us still have a lot more time to go in the growing season, and some of us are starting to get to the end. The preparation, anticipation, you could almost call it, I think is important, because it's happened to me way too many times where I know the end is coming. I know the nights are getting colder, but maybe it's a selective choice of which things I think are most important and what I'm going to do in the garden. But there have been many years where it's like, oh, I'll protect my plants later, or I'll take care of this other activity like harvesting later. And then we get one of those really cold, unexpected nights, And it's too late to do some of that harvesting. It's too late to protect the plants. We talked about that recently, extending your season and some of the things you can do. If you're not thinking about that before the end of the season, it's too late when you have those really cold nights and when you have to have taken action beforehand. And then you look back and go, well, I guess that's a lesson learned. They're great lessons to learn. It's just, that's why I'm here, to kind of help you so you don't have to live with some of those lessons as time goes on. So I just saw that Yankee Sista Homestead has signed in. It's nice to see you here. It's been a while. And I was trying to look back to see the specific comment. I just saw some others that were commenting that you're here today. So it's so nice to have Diane on, and of course, everybody that's here on a normal basis as well. Throw out your questions. What kind of things are you doing at the end of the season? What kind of things are you wondering about, particularly if you're a new gardener? What are you worried about? And I don't like to worry in the garden. I don't think you need to worry in the garden, but a lot of gardeners worry as we get close to the end of the season. So let's try to comfort some of your concerns in this discussion today, and let me know what's going on in your garden and some of those activities that you're doing as you get to the end of your growing season. Now, some of the stuff I'm doing is cleaning up the garden. I had a hailstorm a little over a week ago, and it devastated a lot of my plants. So some of the things that I was hoping were going to carry through another month are really struggling. And you've heard me say this before. When I'm asked, what is my nemesis? What plant do I have difficulty with? I always answer okra. I have a really hard time growing okra. But this year, I've had a great time growing okra. My okra is doing so well. Well, that is until it got devastated by the hailstorm and knocked off most of the leaves and damaged a lot of those beautiful okra pods. So I'm beginning to look at how can I keep the okra going that needs extra time because the leaves were damaged. So as I'm looking to protect my plants, to try to extend my growing season, my focus is on the okra specifically. My melons did great this year, but they're too far gone. Their leaves were just destroyed by the hailstorm. So I'm kind of letting them just set out and season a little bit. I'll be bringing them in the next couple days, and that bed is done. We're past the point for me to really do much as far as establishing a fall garden now in those beds. So I'm getting into the cleanup mode. I'm getting into the amending mode. I still have the plants growing. I had hailcloth over all of my tomatoes and peppers, so they're still doing great. But as the temperatures begin to fall going into fall, as we hit that 50-degree Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius temperature overnight, things begin to slow down. And as the sun begins to rise later in the morning and set earlier in the evening, there's not as much light, the plants are slowing down. And as the length of time that these plants have been in the ground, most of our summer garden in particular, like cucumbers, they're slowing down. They're reaching the point that they're giving us their harvest, and they're calling it an end. They're ready for the season to be over. We might not be ready for the season to be over, but the plants are. So a very common problem, and I'm guilty of this every single year, is to try to get more out of those plants, to try to keep the plants happy so they keep producing. But you have to realize at some point, the plants are done. The conditions just aren't right for them to keep going. They'll stay alive. They'll continue to have the fruit ripen on the vine, but it's not going to happen at the same pace that it did in August. September can be a world of difference in the garden. So if you're aware of that, then you can prepare for it. That's one of those things where it can be a little discouraging when the plants just aren't doing as well as you want them to do. It's the time of year. It's all those environmental factors that really can make a difference. So be aware of that And the transition between a nice, vibrant summer garden to a slow and quiet and not as productive fall garden, it's easy to handle as long as you just are aware of it. And so Katie's asking, do you think we can get closed caption? So that's a good question. Serena had asked that a few months ago. And there's an issue with the software that I use and the way it integrates with uh, the YouTube. And most of it is bandwidth, actually, with what limitations I have with my internet and with that software. I'm not able to do closed captioning in real time or close to real time. But after the video is finalized, so when we finish with the live stream here, it takes a few hours for it to have been checked by YouTube. And then I'm not exactly sure how much time, but you should be able to see closed captioning in replay after this live stream is complete and after it shows up as a video on YouTube. But yeah, I looked into that and I'm not able to do a real-time or close to real-time closed captioning currently. But if that changes, of course, I'll definitely pounce on it. So thank you for asking that question. And I would love to be able to offer that, but that part of the technology just doesn't work. And oh, there you go. Yeah, Shandy's Garden says closed caption services comes later and is applied by YouTube. I don't have control over that. So thank you. You're exactly right, Shandy. That is one of the limitations of doing a live stream like this through a third-party software and into YouTube and then live to you. We can have the chatting all you want, but the closed captioning is a bit limited. And the same with different languages. I don't know if you know, but if English is not your primary language, YouTube has the ability to turn my videos into other languages. And so you should check into that if that's something that you or someone else is interested in. Raphaelia Boo Boo is saying, Gardner Scott, I'm worried about my Kajari melon that is still green. I'm in zone 5B and the temps have been in the high 60s and wondering if it will ever ripen. Great question. So I'm not sure if it's just a coincidence or if you're doing it on purpose, but I grew the Kajari melon last year and I had the same issue. And going into September, my melons were still green and I kept waiting for them to change color. It's such a beautiful color when the Kajari melon is fully ripe. And waited and I waited and I waited, and it just takes time. And I think I was harvesting my Kajari melons the first week of October last year. Lucky for me, I had a good September. It didn't reach frost point for me in Colorado last year, and the Kajari melons were able to ripen. So just have some patience and wait. And if the frost threatens, like I was just talking about with the okra, throw some protection over those plants. Throw a tarp on those plants, put some plastic over those plants, try to get those extra few days of warmth if a frost threatens overnight, and they should ripen. They took longer to ripen than I expected last year, but they still ripen. And this is one of those things I've talked about before when we talk about the days to harvest. So I forget, the Kajari melon is relatively quick. I want to say that it's like a 75-day to harvest kind of melon. And I started from seed in my garden last year. Well, whenever you see like a 75 days to harvest, that's if everything's going great. If the temperatures are staying at 80 Fahrenheit, 27 Celsius every day, and not dropping down to 60 or 16 Celsius instead. When the temperatures drop, when the nights cool, when the daylight is less, the plant is going to slow down. And so what might be a 75-day melon ends up being an 85 or 90-day melon. That's what I typically experience here in Colorado, is it takes longer for those longer types of fruits, because by the time they're beginning to ripen, everything is slowing down in my garden. It's September. things are slowing down in my garden. So I love Kajari melon. I don't know if you've grown it before, but it's a wonderful melon. But just be aware it's going to take a little bit longer, and hopefully you can give it some time, and you'll get a harvest in the weeks ahead. Karen at A Garden for All Seasons is saying, Gardener Scott, I'm trying to figure out if I should take out this year's blackberry canes. They've surprised me in the past with a second crop, but I think it's too late. And so that's in Dallas, Texas. So if you need the space, if you're going to be putting in new blackberries, then by all means do so. The thing about blackberries is they're not a perennial. They're not going to, the same cane is not going to produce every single year. You probably know that. And particularly if it is the second year. So most blackberries are going to fruit on the second year's, the cane in the second year. And so if you've already had that, then sure, yeah, you could take out some of the blackberry canes. There are a number of varieties, like you say, that might get you a second crop. If you don't need to take them out, leave them in. You might, I mean, the way the weather has been in Texas over the last couple of years, it's been so hot and kind of crazy. You might be able to get a second harvest if you leave them in. Not as likely, and that, I think that's probably why you're asking the question. So I would consider, and this is an option, if you want to extend how many plants you have. This time of year, as we start moving into fall, your soil is still going to be warm. The plants are still going to stay alive. Consider propagating. Go ahead and take some of those blackberry canes and use layering as a propagation method. And I haven't really talked much about layering, but blackberries are ideal for layering. And the idea is that you just take the cane and you pull it down, let it rest on the ground, take like a garden staple to hold it in place, and you can rough up the outer part of that cane. I kind of, like I showed in my most recent video where I was propagating softwood cuttings. It's kind of the same idea, where you rough up that outer section of the cane, and then you're burying it. You take a staple, you hold it to the ground, you can cover it with a little bit of soil, maybe a little bit of mulch, and it's going to root. You'll have a new blackberry cane in that section. And so that's what I've done with my blackberries in the past, is rather than take them out, like if they're older canes or they've already fruited, I'll go ahead and just bend them to the ground and use the layering method of propagation, so that next year I've got a new cane popping up in that area. So there's an option as well, rather than taking them out completely. But if you're done with them and you don't expect that second crop, and you're going to free up that space either for new plants or for the other blackberries to spread into, then sure, you can absolutely consider taking them out. And that's kind of a late season activity. When we talk about the end of the growing season, that's one of those things that we have to think about, is taking the plants out, putting them to bed. I'm looking at my raspberries right now, and they're the yellow raspberries that I have been producing. They're so delicious. And the red raspberries are still pretty slow. They're not doing as well this year. And so I'm thinking, should I just go ahead and cut off all the tops of my raspberries, rather than having those canes put all their energy into the fruit that's probably not going to fully develop before I get a hard freeze? Let them put that energy into roots and building a stronger plant for next year. That's a consideration. Just accepting that the harvest isn't going to happen this year, and that you need to look at the health of the plant. Same thing. I had a video a couple years ago about topping the tomato plants. And it's that time of year for those of us with the season about to end, is to think about stopping the production of new fruit, stopping the new flowers and the new fruit that's going to rob a lot of energy from the plant, and instead look at what's already on the plant and trying to make the plant as healthy as possible. So September can be a really good time for many of us to prune the growing tips off of tomato plants so that it's not worried about developing that new growth. It's putting its energy into the fruit and the root system. And sure, when the frost comes, the tomato plant is going to die, but it's going to be the biggest, strongest tomato plant until that point by pruning off new suckers and pruning off those growing tips and trying to get the plant to kind of relax a little bit. It puts a lot of energy into reproduction. And if you can take that away from the plant, it's got all that energy that the roots have been developing that can go into other areas of the plant. Minnesota Gardening is asking, my peppers flowered late. Have you dug them up, potted them, and brought them inside to finish growing, or do you prefer covering them in some type of temporary greenhouse? So for me, it depends on how late they are. And so I mentioned this, I think I might have mentioned it last week, with the peppers that I was growing last year. And they were also late and they were slow in ripening, and I covered them. That was the easiest thing for me. There was fruit on the plants. They just needed more time to ripen. So I had my hoops, I had my plastic, I covered them. I gave them that extra dedication to get them to the point of harvest. I might suggest that's where the timing comes in. If they're so late that they're just now in that flower stage, they haven't set the fruit, then yes, it does make more sense to try to dig them up and move them into an area like a greenhouse, or even move them inside. Because I've grown peppers inside under lights before in the same kind of situation. It's going to stunt the plant. That transplanting process is going to slow down the plant. It's going to kind of have to get reestablished again. But if you're past the point of those flowers turning into fruit and then giving you fruit before your winter sets in, you really have nothing to lose by potting them up and bringing them inside. And at that point, not only are you growing your peppers indoors to ripen and have some fruit, but you can think of it as overwintering. A lot of gardeners overwinter their peppers by digging them up, putting them into pots, and bringing them into a nice, secluded, warm environment going through the winter so that the plants survive. Then when you put them back in spring, you've got a 2-year-old pepper plant. Pepper plants will grow for years and years and years. And as long as they aren't killed by that freeze, you can grow them for years and years and years. So consider that as an option as well. Even if it's not to let those flowers develop into fruit, or for new flowers and fruit to develop, consider just taking this as an opportunity to overwinter your peppers so that next year, rather than starting late, the plant is already alive and growing and a year old, and you'll be able to start early by transplanting a pretty mature plant. That's a big reason for overwintering, is that next year you'll be transplanting a mature plant versus the brand new baby plant that you started from seed or picked up at a nursery. So yeah, that can be a great option. So Jeanette is asking, Gardner Scott, first year growing dry beans, pole beans, will they dry if I harvest while they are still a little green? So they will dry. You do have to be a little careful, because if you want the dried beans, like if you're growing like a type of pinto bean, there are pole beans that are pinto beans, and you want to reach that point where you're able to store the beans as a dry bean, it's better to leave them on the plant and reach that dried stage. If you are saving them for planting next year, it's better to leave them on the plant until they reach that fully mature point. Because when you harvest while still green, they might not have reached that point where they're going to dry. They may actually be too young and too green, and they'll just shrivel up and rot. And you may have seen that if you buy like green beans at the supermarket, and you store your green beans in the refrigerator or on your counter, and they get all shriveled up and stay green. They don't dry out. They just get moldy and rot because they're too young. So leave them as long as possible on the plant, if that's what you're looking for. If you want that fully mature, viable dried bean, they should really dry in the pod on the plant. There's a point, like we've talked about this with other fruits. There's a point that they will be okay if they're still slightly green, but longer on the plant really does make a big difference. Okay, let's see. This is so good to see all the comments. You guys are really active today. I'm so glad that my, knock on wood, internet is still up. Bote Life is saying, comment, even when crops are done, I will leave plants long after they stop producing. Some of them make good cover crops as long as they can live long enough they can make it to spring. Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I talk about cleaning up the garden and using fall as an opportunity for cleaning up the garden. Primarily, it's because I use it as an opportunity to amend the soil in fall. But you're exactly right. Using the plants that are no longer producing as a cover crop to protect your soil, to keep the soil life going well while the sun is still out, encouraging that population of microbes. Covering the soil makes a big difference in that, and roots as well. If you leave roots in the ground, that life that surrounds the root, that root biome, is incredible. There are microorganisms that only exist around the root, and they're very productive for soil health. So yes, that's a great idea to do that as well, to leave your plants in place. So it comes down to what time you have and the purpose of what you're doing. In the epic gardening video that I was in last month, talking about cover crops, that was one of the issues to consider is, do you need organic matter? Do you need biomass to add to your soil as part of your amending? And absolutely, you could use cucumbers as a biomass. The cucumbers are going to stop producing when the temperatures start getting colder. The leaves are going to shrivel up a little bit, but they'll cover the ground. They'll protect the ground. And there's no reason why you can't turn cucumbers into your soil as a biomass. Nobody ever talks about cucumbers as a cover crop, but why not? It achieves the same results as a lot of those other plants that we think of specifically as cover crops. So yeah, absolutely. Nothing wrong with that. And that actually makes a lot of sense to go ahead and leave the plants even when they stop producing. The fruiting plants when they stop producing. I'll do that for a lot of the beans and the peas and smaller plants that are like that I've harvested them all. They're really not doing much except they're holding the soil together, and as they flop down to the ground, they become kind of like a living mulch, and then they're easy to turn into the soil when I get to that point and I'm in the bed later. So yeah, Dave's got a good idea, and I suggest that as a consideration as you move forward as well. So thank you, Jay. Jay Dixon is just amazing. When I was having issues in the very beginning, she's letting everybody know that I'm going to be a little delayed. She's giving links to everything, including Gardner Scott's Guide to Raised Bed Gardening, my book. You're just absolutely incredible. So thank you for all you do, Jay. Okay, let's see. Oh, there's that video. Yeah, Jade posted the how to top tomatoes, why, when, and how video that I have talking about what you do at this time of year if you want to try to make the best plants that you can have waiting for those cold conditions to develop. Shawnee Gross says, I would love to cut the tops off my tomato plants. I'm growing cowpeas with the tomatoes. Cowpeas have vined around all the tops of the tomatoes on the cattle panel. Wow, that's cool. Tall cowpeas. Uh, yeah, and that's another thing that I have done a lot with, particularly like my sunflowers. A lot of my taller plants, if I have a vining plant near it, yeah, I'll use some of those fading plants as trellises for the vining plants. So there's no reason why you can't use your tomatoes as a trellis for your cowpeas. I think having plants grow together like that is actually a pretty good idea. So good for you. Leanne is asking, when is the best time to prune down raspberries, fall or spring? Does it matter if it's a prima cane or floor cane variety? Yes, it does matter. Uh, so, and there's a couple other considerations. So I grow heritage raspberries, and they are a prima cane variety. So when we talk about raspberries, there are two primary types, and this is what Leanne is referring to. You have the raspberries that are going to flower and fruit in the first year on the cane. That's the prima cane, that first year cane. They're going to flower and fruit in the first year, which is awesome. So my heritage raspberries give me fruit. And the problem for different gardeners is that because it all happens within the same year, is you get the fruit late. So I get my raspberries on my heritage raspberry canes in September into the beginning of October. It works. I love it. I like being able to harvest in the same year. For those type of canes, you can chop them down once the season is done. Once you harvest off of that flora cane, chop them down to the ground, mow them, and they'll do it all over again next year. That can be very important. And I've talked about this in the past because here in Colorado, I've got an insect pest called the raspberry cane borer. And if I leave my canes up to wait until spring, they are infected with the raspberry cane borer. They bore into the canes, and I'm just creating more problem with that pest. To keep the raspberry cane borer from overwintering, you have to cut them down in fall so that when they grow in spring, you don't have those young insects that are going to kill your crop. And I was a little late last year, and I'm still experimenting trying to figure out the life cycle, but I lost a few of my canes this year to the raspberry cane borer because enough of them had overwintered that it affected my crop. So that's one of those issues where cutting down the raspberries in the fall makes a big difference. Now, if you're growing the type of raspberries, and a lot of blackberries are in the same category when we talk about brambles that fruit on the flora cane, that's the second year. So it's the same cane, but it doesn't give you fruit until the second season. And those you definitely want to keep up over the winter. You can prune off the top, and if you had the growth, 3 feet high, whatever it happens to be, you can still prune off the tips, and that might encourage a little more growth the following year. But those you can prune off that tip in fall and spring. It really doesn't matter, and you don't even have to prune off the tip. Most people will do that, but it's not absolutely necessary. And so there's a lot of flexibility because those tend to be what is often called a summer bearing raspberry, because they're going to give you fruit early in the year. The plant is already growing, the cane is already established. They're going to start flowering probably in late spring, and you're going to get fruit in summer. So the way those work is once they have given you that fruit, and this is why when you look at like a blackberry growing video with the same type of method, you got to keep track of what are the first year canes and what are the second year canes, because once they've fruited on that second year, you can go ahead and prune them down, and it works great to cut them back all the way to the ground in fall. So fall is typically a good time to prune your raspberries, regardless of what type you have, but you got to keep track of what kind of cane you have and how old that cane is, and whether you've got raspberry cane borer as an issue. Because if you don't have raspberry cane borer, then sure, you could do it in the spring. But for many of us, fall is a good time of year to do our raspberry pruning. And that's one of those things, putting our garden to bed, those activities of when is the end of the gardening season. And I wanted to talk about that today because I kind of see the whole year as the gardening season. I may not have plants actively growing in my garden. I might not have things that I'm harvesting, but I'm still gardening. I'm still getting out there. And sometimes it's things like pruning. It's cutting back those raspberry or blackberry canes. The rest of my garden is asleep by the time I do that, because I usually wait till it's cold and we've had those first frosts. But those are kind of the kind of activities that you can do to keep yourself active, to get out there and be in the garden. And when it comes to my fruit trees, I'm typically doing that in February, long before anything is growing in my garden, because it's cold in Colorado in February. But I'm still getting out there and pruning the trees and getting them ready for the springtime. And so I know a lot of gardeners will look at that as the beginning of your gardening season, that early in the year you might be pruning, anticipating the growth that's coming in spring. But I just look at that as an extension of the year. There's gaps in the winter when I'm not out in the garden on a regular daily basis. But for the most part, there's always an activity going on. So tell me what you think. How do you look at the end of the season? Do you have a defining moment that you say, my garden is done? You wipe your hands, you walk away, and you say, I'll come back next year? Or do you have those kind of activities that keep you going, that keep you going out to the garden, and that keep you thinking about gardening on a pretty regular basis? And so this is one of those kind of things that I I I wanted to talk about this today, because some of my gardener friends that we've been talking, they're kind of in that mode of like, I'm done. Season's over. I'm so I had someone recently say something along the lines of, I'm looking forward to that first freeze so that I can just put the garden to bed and not worry about it anymore. Nothing wrong with that. And if that's how you define it, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on, is there a definite beginning and a definite end to gardening? And I've done that for many years. I thought that's what you had to do. I'm just trying to promote the idea that you don't necessarily need to have an end to your season, that maybe you really can extend it out. I mean, you really can look at gardening as a year-round activity. And if you take that approach, what are some of those kind of things that you do in the winter months, or in those days when you're not actively in your garden, and you can be doing some of those kind of things to take care of that need, that desire of being close to the earth. I can't be digging in my garden in the winter because everything is just frozen solid, but I can still get out and spread some mulch and do some pruning and do some cleaning and do a lot of that other prep that needs to be taken care of. So those are some of the thoughts about. And Serena, I just saw Serena made a comment about bulbs. And so that's another one of those activities that when the rest of the garden is fading, start thinking about what next year's garden is going to look like. And so get your bulbs and put them in the ground in fall. That's when you do a spring flowering bulb, you put it in the ground in fall. In spring, that's when you put the bulbs in for your fall flowering plants for the most part. And so for all of us, September is a time of year to start thinking about putting bulbs in, whether it's the spring flowering or the fall flowering kind of bulbs. Most of the garden may not be as active as it was, but you could still get out there while the soil can be dug to put some of those bulbs in the ground. Make sure you're ordering as soon as possible. I was checking on some of the bulbs that I was interested in for next year, and they're already sold out. I had purchased some a while back, and I'm glad I did, but a lot of other gardeners are looking at this time as well as bulb time, and you need to act on it to make sure you've got your bulbs, or you're gonna have to come up with other options. I'm actually planning. I was thinking about this yesterday. There's a video I've been planning to make for a number of years now, and I want to do it with the bulbs at the big box store. So I'm going to go to the big box store this week, I think, and start doing some filming, get some bulbs. That video's not coming out for a year, but I'm going to start doing some of the prep because it's a video I've been wanting to make for a long time. And I need to get to the store and get those bulbs because they're going to be disappearing here pretty soon. Penny's asking, Gardener Scott, do you have any suggestions on growing olive trees that you could share with me, please? Thank you, Penny from Oregon. I really don't. Sorry, Penny. I've never gardened in an area where I could grow olive trees, and certainly not here in Colorado. So I've never grown an olive tree, and so I don't have the experience to actually give you any suggestions other than the climate is important. Olive trees are the kind of plant that does well in a Mediterranean environment. And I'm guessing you might be in Southern Oregon. And so if you've got that kind of Mediterranean climate, then you can do the olive trees. The thing about Oregon, depending on where you are, of course, is it can be very cold in the winter, and it can get colder than what's typical for a Mediterranean climate. So just make sure that the olive trees that you might be growing match your zone so that they can survive through the winter. And that holds true with all fruit trees. The Chicago fig trees that I'm growing in my greenhouse just won't survive outside my greenhouse here in Colorado, but they can survive inside my greenhouse, and it's an unheated greenhouse. It's that little bit of difference in the temperature inside the greenhouse versus outside the greenhouse allows my Chicago fig trees to stay alive. It's the same basic idea with something like an olive tree. Just knowing the limit of the cold that those trees can handle going into the winter. But beyond that, I really can't give you much in the way of suggestions because I've never grown the olive trees. I'd love to grow olive trees, but I can't. So thank you for that. Yeah, there you go. Jay says olive trees are not generally suited to the climate of Oregon. Careful selection and treatment is necessary to have any chance at all. Thank you for that, Jay. Yeah. And that's what I was alluding to. It's just you have to match it with the location that you're at and keep your fingers crossed, because I know the coast is probably too cool to be growing olive trees, but if you live in a little pocket, you might be able to handle it. So oh, there you go. Good job, Jay. Oregon State research on olive trees. Fantastic. That's a great idea. Olive research in Oregon. So that says it can probably be possible. Well, I'll have to go to that and see what Oregon says about their olive trees, but that's awesome. So Llama says, I leave my floricanes on my fall gold raspberries for two reasons. They fruit again on the second season. And most importantly, the cutworms go after the floricanes in spring. So I want to ensure they live. Okay, good. That's one of those things to think about. And that ties in. Yes, if I leave my canes up and I don't get the raspberry cane borers, I do get a crop in the second year. So you're exactly right. The floricanes, the primocanes become floricanes, and you can get a double crop if you are able to deal with whatever pest you might have. So good for you that you can get the 2 years out of the raspberries. I think that's good. Wasabi Gal saying, I usually plan to clean out the garden by mid-September due to our early frosts. After that, I clean, gather leaves, add compost if I have it, mulch, and tuck the beds in for winter. Yeah, that matches pretty closely with the timeline that I have as well. And I've got videos where I've talked about this in the past where I'll wait until after those first frosts to do all of that because the garden is done, and the time I would have spent watering and the time I would have spent harvesting and pruning and all those other activities can be spent on the cleaning and the composting and the mulching and all those kind of things. So as you approach a first frost, think about that. Just before the first frost, just after the first frost, that tends to be a good time because it's still relatively warm for most of us, and we can get out in the garden and we can do those kind of activities without being too hot and sweaty because it's too sunny, or being too cold and chilly because there's no sun out. Finding that happy spot in September is often it. So TJ the Hawk is saying, I always consider the end of the season when the ground fully freezes, usually late December, early January in New Hampshire. I almost always have fresh carrots for Christmas and New Year's. Good for you. Yeah, and that's kind of what I look at, and really I do try to think of it as a year-round gardening opportunity. But my outdoor garden, I do the same thing. When it freezes, and for me, it's definitely in December, then that's when my outdoor gardening season has come to an end. I'll still be doing those activities like pruning and mulching and cleaning, but the active growing of the plants and the considerations will be December. I haven't been able to get to fresh carrots for Christmas and New Year, so I'm a bit envious of that. But that's a good point, particularly with root vegetables. And for many of us, you can still start them in September and grow them into November and December to harvest at the end of the year before the ground freezes. So just a way to extend the season and keep getting some of those plants to the very end until they really can't be growing anymore because the ground is freezing. So that's a good point. That's one of those things. Yes, I would agree with that as far as a defining point of the end of the garden. Robin Garden says, my full stop in the garden is the end of October, when I typically spread 3 to 4 inches of compost. Last year, I did alfalfa pellets under the compost. Total win for the 2025 garden. Good for you. Yeah, I think a year ago, I talked about doing alfalfa pellets and I didn't. And so I'm thinking about doing it again this year. So I'm glad you said that, because that is one of those things. I'm planning on doing alfalfa pellets. I'll normally spread compost, and then I'll cover that with a winter mulch. And I'm planning on doing exactly what you're talking about. Instead, go to my local ranch supply store and get some of those alfalfa pellets. And instead of the compost, or maybe in addition to the compost, spread them on the soil and then cover them with my winter mulch. So good for you. Good suggestion. I think that's a great idea. And maybe you've given me some motivation to actually make it happen this year. There's so many things. We all do that. There's so many things we want to try in the garden. And then at the end of the season, whenever that end is, we go, I forgot to do that thing, or I never got around to doing that thing, or I'm going to do that thing next year. There's just so much about gardening that there's always next year. Bowtie Life says, I have a definite end of the season right around Christmas. Granted, it is only 2 weeks before the next season's seed starting season. No rest for the wicked. And I do try to take those last 2 weeks off of the year and kind of think of it as vacation time. So yeah, it's only 2 weeks, but you're right. You're starting with the seeds shortly after that. Taking a break, I do advocate. I do think it's important, even though gardening can be a year-round activity. Taking some breaks periodically, just so you keep your energy up, just so you keep your motivation up, that can be very important. And so, yeah, the end of the season around Christmas time, I would agree with that. Sean is saying, I don't view it as an end to the gardening season, but more as a break. Oh, there you go. Just talking about that. Winter's a great time to plan, research, and read. Also a time to enjoy some of the harvest. Absolutely. And I've had usually in winter, that's one of the videos I make where I talk about reading the catalogs, reading new books, doing all of that planning and researching and reading. So yeah, absolutely, Sean. I completely agree with you. And it is an end. It's an end to that physical get your fingers in the ground, but there's still so much to do every morning. Come wintertime, every morning I'm on YouTube watching gardening videos. And there's not a lot of gardening videos being made in winter. And so that's another thing I like about doing that planning and that reading and that research is watching some of those videos in December and January to get motivated to see, something that one of, my favorite channels, one of your favorite channels was doing during the active growing season. And so you can see the green plants and the harvests, even when there's snow outside and you're all bundled up because it's so cold. So uh, I, I like doing that. That's one of my favorite wintertime activities. Absolutely. Boothby Gardens is saying, should elephant garden garlic be planted the same way as regular hardneck garlic? Yes, absolutely. So the elephant garlic is not technically a garlic. You might know that. But it grows just like garlic. And so plant it the same way. And generally that means plant it in fall and allow it to stay in the ground over winter, and then treat it like all your other plants in spring and in summer, and then harvest it when it's ready in summer. It grows and looks just like regular garlic. The one thing that you might consider is that it may need some more nutrients because it's a bigger bulb. It's in the leek family, and so it has slightly different nutrient requirements than regular garlic. In my experience, garlic is almost a no-brainer. You just put it in the ground, you put the cloves in, and as long as they're exposed to that cold of winter, then they will bulb and you'll get garlic plants. Nice, loose, rich soil is what it likes. The elephant garlic, because it grows bigger and it's a bigger bulb, definitely needs that nutrient-rich, loose soil. And so just be aware of that. Because the garlic bulb is so much smaller, the soil may not need to be as loose. I've grown garlic in some pretty dense soil before, but to get that full size elephant garlic, you really do need to focus on the soil and make sure that you're giving the elephant garlic plant everything that it needs. But as far as the planting, yeah, basically the clove of the elephant garlic is going to be bigger than a garlic clove. And as I show in all my garlic videos, you'll basically plant the clove twice its size. So that means the elephant garlic is going to be a little bit deeper in the soil because it is a bigger clove. Other than that, the process is still exactly the same. Plant it like a rocket ship with the flat end at the bottom and the pointy end at the top, and a little bit deeper than a standard garlic clove, and you should do fine. Myra's asking, Gardner Scott, do the strawberries in your raised bed survive the winter? And if so, how do you top off your soil without disturbing the crowns? Yeah, they absolutely do. And what I do is add compost, just a sprinkle of compost on the surface, and then a little bit, excuse me. Swallowed wrong. A little bit of compost and mulch, and that's it. And they survive my winter just fine. What I do, and I'm actually in the process of doing it in one of my beds right now, is I revitalize the beds. And so I did a video about this last year. The strawberries will only last about 3 years before they really aren't productive anymore. So instead of worrying about amending the soil each year, I start with a good, rich soil that can last 3 years with just a little topping off of compost and mulch at the end of the season. And then about every 3 years, sometimes every 2 years, depending on if I've got the plants to replace them, I will pull out the plants in half the bed and I'll do that process all over again. I will amend the soil. I will get a nice, good, rich soil ready to go. And then I'll put all new plants in that half of the bed. And so that's why it tends to work with an every 2 year cycle, but at least every 3 years. You just rotate your strawberries. And instead of having to worry about every single year and topping off or enriching the soil, the focus is really in-depth amending every couple years. And that's what I do. And that's what I show in the video that I did last year. And Jay probably already has that video posted in the comments. It's work, but that's what you've got to do. I lived in California in the San Joaquin Valley a number of years ago. And on the way to work, I would pass strawberry fields. And it's amazing what commercial growers do. They rip everything up and start fresh every single time. And so in a single year in California, it wasn't unusual to see the same field have two complete crops that were ripped up and planted again. So that's kind of what we're doing in the home garden, because depending on the variety of strawberry that you have, it's going to produce the best often in that first year, probably for sure in the second year, but then in the third year, not at all. So there's really no reason to keep the old strawberry plants in the ground. So just bring that into your plan as far as how you're going to grow strawberries, that you're going to need to pull out the old ones. I mentioned this, I think, a few weeks ago about my strawberry beds and the Ozark Beauty strawberries. I had 2 beds of Ozark Beauty that just didn't grow. Last year, they gave me nothing. And this year, they gave me close to nothing. And so this week, that was one of my gardening activities. I pulled out all of the plants from one of my beds of Ozark Beauty strawberries and amended the soil a little bit. Didn't need a lot. It was still in pretty good shape because I only put them in last year. And I put in my TriStar strawberries and my beautiful bed of TriStar strawberries that was just doing great this year. The plants were big and beautiful. I put pots and I was potting up the runners off of those plants. That's what I did this week. Pulled out all of the old ones that weren't working well and put in new plants in that bed completely. So that should do me for at least 2 years. I don't need to worry about anything in that bed for at least 2 more years. I'll direct new runners and I'll pot up new runners, but I've totally redone that bed with my strawberries because the others just weren't performing well. Sometimes you got to do that. Sometimes you just take care of it. As far as the winter protection is concerned, I don't cover the plants with mulch. I just add a little bit extra mulch. I like to use the pine needle mulch. I let the plant protect itself. So I'll leave the leaves on the strawberry plant. So typically in the December timeframe, my plants are still a little bit green. By the time I get those really cold days of January, the leaves are all brown. I leave the leaves on because they are insulating the crown. They're protecting the plant. It isn't until spring, when we have warming conditions, that I'll go in and I'll remove all of those brown dead leaves on top of the strawberry so that the new growth can appear and have space to grow. But I don't do anything special here in Zone 5B Colorado, 7,000 feet elevation, snow and cold and wind. My strawberries come through every winter with no issues whatsoever. So the soil is important to focus on, but I wouldn't worry too much about the extra work if you start with that good soil to start with. So Jack is saying zone 9A, we bought a variety of fruit trees. Nothing says they're dwarf, but I plan on topping around 10 feet. How far apart should they be planted? So for me, aesthetically, I plant them as far apart as they're going to be tall. And so in my mini orchard area, I've got semi-dwarf trees that I'm planning to keep at about 12 to 15 feet max in height. And some of them aren't going to even be able to grow higher than that. And so I've got my trees planted 15 feet apart, basically. So I'm allowing that the tree is going to be a little bit taller than it is wide, but I want enough space between the trees that there's airflow and that all the branches can develop. So if you're planning on a 10-foot high tree, I would plant them probably 12 feet apart. Same basic idea. You can still have a nice rounded tree. You can still have some good lateral branch development. You can still have lots of airspace for insects and birds. If you are planning on walking between the trees regularly, like your pathway leads between the trees, then you might want a little bit extra space. Maybe put 10-foot high trees 15 feet apart, just so you have the walking space in between. The way I've set up my trees is the center area is the pathway, and then the trees are on the side of that area. So that's why I've got them 15 feet apart, and they're going to be 12 feet tall, because I'm not going to be walking between them. And so I don't really need that extra spacing. So anticipate how much lateral growth you want and whether you need that pathway. And I would say 12 to 15 feet apart is a good start. You can definitely do closer depending on the varieties. If you're going to be pruning in such a way that they are going to be like a pyramid shape, if you want to do that type of pruning, then you might be able to do 10 foot apart without any issues whatsoever. But that does require a little bit extra pruning, shaping to make sure that it fits within the space that you give those trees. So that's what I would suggest. And yeah, definitely look into other sources and see what other tree growers might recommend. But the nice thing, even if they're not dwarf trees, you can prune them to be a dwarf plant. A lot of gardeners aren't aware of that. And it sounds like that's what your plan is. You can take a standard size. So basically there's dwarf, semi-dwarf, and standard when we talk about fruit trees as to how big they're going to get. And so the dwarf trees are the same tree that you can have in any of the categories. It's just the root stock is a dwarf tree. And so it's not going to grow as big. And it's the same with a semi-dwarf rootstock or a standard rootstock. And so with a dwarf rootstock, the tree might only ever grow 10 to 12 feet tall. And with a semi-dwarf, you're looking at maybe 15 to 18 feet. And with a standard tree, depending on what kind of tree it is, it might be 20 to 30 feet tall. That's the key difference between the different types of rootstocks and how big the tree will grow. But if you're pruning, you can use any type of rootstock and just keep the tree to the size that you want with selective structural pruning. And it's a great way. I do that with my espalier and keeping the trees at a much more manageable size for the aesthetic reasons. But you could do that with a tree that's growing like a tree with branches on all sides. Absolutely. Let me know what you think, Jack, when you decide on that in particular, as to the distance that you are settling on as to how far apart they are and the reasons. Is it because you wanted a pathway or because you wanted to fit more into a smaller space? Those are some considerations as well. But yeah, I'd like you to share with us at some point in the future what you actually decided on and why you decided on it. That's helpful to share that kind of information. Jeanette is saying, my very young apple tree trunks got chewed up by the weed whacker. Any suggestions to help healing? So yeah, this is one of those things. So when you look at the bark or talk about the bark of a tree, it's very important as to how deep the damage was as to whether it can even heal. And so girdling is a term that is used when the trunk has been damaged all the way around to the point that it's not capable of healing. That the damage is past, because there's all these different layers. You've got the xylem and the phloem, all the structures that carry nutrients up and down the tree. And if those are damaged and they're just inside the bark, then the tree is not capable of feeding itself. And if the damage has extended that deep, there really isn't much you can do. If it's just external, where the bark was chewed up a little bit, but the internal structure of the trunk is still alive, then over time, it's going to heal itself. And there isn't a lot you can do. Now, I'd advocate the IV organics. I think there's a link in the description below. You can paint your trees, and the IV organic paint, and I show this in a video, it's not like a latex paint. It's not a real paint. It's basically some minerals and some herbal and extracts and oils that are intended to deter pests. Because when you have damage to a tree that's been eaten up by a weed whacker, pests will get into that, and you can have even worse problems because the bugs are like, oh, they opened the door for us, let's go inside. Well, doing something like the IV organic paint will deter those pests from entering into the wounds that have been created on the tree. The tree still needs to breathe. All of that trunk area needs to breathe. And that's the nice thing about the IV organic is it's all organic. And so it allows the exchange of oxygen so that a tree can heal. You might consider something like that. If the wounds are bad enough that you're worried that insect pests are going to get in, you can do something. But otherwise, it's just patience and trying to see if the tree is going to survive. If you start, and it's going to be a long time, that it might not be till next year that you start noticing that the leaves are dying on one side of the tree because it's just not getting enough nutrition because all of those internal parts of the trunk have been damaged. If you've got the patience and the willingness to see if the tree will survive, I would say go for it. It's amazing how resilient some of these trees are. I've got 2 trees in my garden that I wrote off as dead, but one of them I decided to leave in place. The other I decided to go ahead and transplant to a whole new area. I thought it was done for. Both have come back and they're doing very well. They'd been eaten down to a nub by the deer and they've come back. So there's that potential if the damage isn't so bad that it might bounce back. Give it a try. That's what I like doing, is giving it a try. I had one tree that was munched on by rabbits this year, I think. And so I got plastic protection that I wrapped around the trunk because I had the bark that was damaged, not so bad that I was worried about the girdling killing the tree, but bad enough that it needed to be protected. So I got the plastic covers that wrap around the trunk, and I used that in addition to the IV organic paint. And it's doing great. It's my peach tree that I'm in love with. And I wanted to make sure that the trunk was protected. So I will leave that in place for a couple years now while the tree recovers and heals those wounds that were eaten by whatever animal it was that ate it. I find it unusual that the rabbits would be eating the bark, but something ate the bark. So had to put in that protection to do it. So good question. And I know sometimes I'll talk about something and don't fully explain it. But Kelly Becker's asking, what is winter mulch exactly? So when I talk about winter mulch, it is a mulch that is specifically put on a bed to protect or enrich the soil in winter when nothing is growing. And so they're often the same, but when I talk about like a summer mulch in my vegetable garden, I'm using straw primarily, and I'll mix it with dried leaves and dried grass clippings. It's a light mulch that allows the air and the water through so that when I water or when it rains, the soil is moistened and the plants grow. And the mulch just protects the soil, keeps the weeds down, and allows the plants to continue growing. A winter mulch is typically thicker. So I'll still use straw and grass clippings and dried leaves, but it's a much thicker layer because I'm protecting the soil. I'm not as concerned about the air and the water reaching the soil because my soil is frozen in the winter. I'm concerned about the sun baking the soil, and I'm worried about weed seeds blowing in, and I'm concerned about, animals making a home in my bed and my dogs digging up the soil. So I will put a thicker layer or a thicker depth of mulch in winter. So during the growing season, I might only have 2 or 3 inches of mulch around most of my vegetable garden plants. In those same beds in winter, I might have 4 to 6 inches of mulch in those beds just to keep everything nice and protected going into the winter. I typically don't use wood chips in my vegetable garden beds, but a wood chip mulch is a winter mulch that a lot of gardeners use. It's a little more permanent and stable to protect the soil. And then in spring, you rake aside all of those wood chips and put your plants in place, and typically we'll do a lighter mulch in the spring. So it's purely to cut down on erosion, to protect the soil from sun damage, to keep the weeds from ever germinating. Those are kind of the ideas behind a winter mulch and why it might be a little bit thicker or a little bit different. Outlier Gardener, thank you so much for that. I just love seeing you here every week. I appreciate that. Thank you for all of you wonderful gardeners. And I thank you, and I thank you for that sentiment as well. Thank everybody on here is just reason to be thankful for all of you wonderful gardeners. So thank you for saying that. I do appreciate it. It's the highlight of my week. That's why I like to start my gardening week with a live stream on Monday so we can all chat and share some of our stuff. Rick says, watching my garlic growing. Good for you. Yeah, I'm looking at my bed that I'm going to be planting garlic in next month. I was just looking at my bag of garlic this weekend, as a matter of fact. I have a paper bag with the bulbs that I'll be planting here next month. So good for you to actually be watching it growing. That's the difference between those of us going into fall and those of us going into spring. So thanks for sharing that, Rick. Appreciate it. Serena's saying, I have 2 strawberry plants growing in my green stock and they have not grown at all since March. Should I cover the green stock for winter to protect them, and will they grow out? So the covering of the green stock. So check out my video. I talk about growing strawberries in a green stock in winter and some of those considerations. And I talk about that, covering the plants. the key is, I forget what zone you might be in, Serena, but in zone 6 or below, strawberries don't do well in a green stock in winter. Zone 7 and above, they do great. But for most container gardening in zone 6 and below, our winters just get too cold. And it's hard for a lot of the plants that are growing in a container, like strawberries in a green stock. And so, yes, chances are you are going to need to protect those strawberry plants if you want to have them grow through the winter. And that will mean covering them and trying to keep the area as warm as possible, so that essentially you're creating a microclimate of zone 7 around your green stock. That's the way to keep those plants alive. If you only have 2 strawberry plants in your green stock, and this is a hard decision to make, and I don't usually recommend this, but it might not be worth the effort. If you've got a 6-tier green stock and you've got 36 total pockets and only 2 of them have plants in it, that could be a lot of work just for those 2 plants. Your decision of how much work you want to put into it. But I look at the balance between the payoff versus the amount of effort that I put into it. And the approach I would take would just be to buy new bare root plants next year and start fresh. Make sure my soil is nice and amended and loose, and the strawberries will grow well in it. I'll make sure that I keep the green stock nice and watered so the soil doesn't dry out. And I'll do that with all new plants rather than putting a lot of effort into just 2. But if you want to save those 2, then chances are you are going to need to protect them in the winter and keep them from dying. The biggest issue, and I talk about this in that video, is you don't want it to dry out. If you allow the green stock soil to dry out completely in winter, then those roots are going to desiccate and the plants are going to die anyway, which is why I say it's extra work for not a lot of payoff. So you do have to keep watering a green stock, even in winter, any container, to keep the soil from drying out, bone dry, to the point that the plants are going to be killed. In the ground with rain and snow, you may think your soil is dry, but there's usually enough moisture at root level to keep the plants alive over winter. That's why they come back in spring. Not so when you're doing container gardening. You can dry them out to the point that the plant just can't survive. So winter watering may be necessary when you're doing plants that you're growing in containers. So just be aware of that. Okay. It's hard to believe that time is just flying by. I'm looking at the time now all of a sudden, and it's like, this is almost the end of our time together. I'm almost beginning to get a little sad. Big Will Dog says, Gardner Scott, if you had a choice of only leaves or chopped leaves, which would you choose and why? So if we're talking mulch, it's chopped leaves. The big reason is that even if you're doing winter mulching, you still do want some air and water exchange. The air still needs to get to the soil to keep the soil alive, and water still needs to get to the soil to keep the soil alive as well. If you use whole leaves, then the issue becomes they can mat. They can basically form a barrier that you don't have any of the water and the air reaching the soil. It just runs off. And so that's why I advocate chopped leaves, is because the air and the water will infiltrate through the mulch to reach the soil. So those are the big reasons. Now, if I'm making mulch, like if I'm making leaf mold, it will happen faster with the chopped leaves because you've got more surface area and it'll break down faster. But as I show in my video of a few years ago when I made leaf mold, most of those leaves were whole leaves, and they broke down just fine. Gave me some beautiful leaf mold. Just takes a little bit longer for that. So it gets back to how much effort you want to make. And when I make leaf mold, I'm relatively lazy. I just take the leaves and put them into the big mass, the volume that's contained by, I use the wire fencing and let it break down. Crushing is that extra step that I don't always take. But when it comes to mulching, I make the extra step of crumbling all the leaves and creating the mulch that way. So those, it's a depends. If I had a choice between the two, most of the time I would do chopped leaves to achieve whatever it is I'm doing with those leaves. Even in the compost pile, if I'm using leaves in the compost pile, they'll break down better in the compost pile if they're crushed. So generally that's the approach I take, and what I would probably recommend to you. Karen is saying, anticipating moving to Northeast Tennessee from Dallas. I got a cherry and mulberry bush and a kiwi vine. Need another variety of each, but can I hope them to do well there? So the nice thing about, I love Tennessee, Northeast Tennessee. And so I was in Knoxville in March, and I saw everything growing in Tennessee. So you're probably going to be able to grow a lot more in Tennessee than you were able to grow in Dallas, as far as variety. Dallas, of course, is, I'm sure, a higher zone, hotter, drier. Tennessee is going to be a little bit cooler, a little bit wetter. I don't have any specific varieties that I would recommend. I would suggest you contact the extension office, talk to some master gardeners in Tennessee and see what they recommend. Chances are you can do this online. I know Colorado, most states have it. The extension service, as part of whatever university, I don't know which university in Tennessee the extension is based with, but there are fact sheets. They've got a ton of information with recommended varieties. So here in Colorado, I refer to that on a pretty regular basis. If I'm going to be adding something completely new to my garden, I'll often go to the extension website and look at the trees, the bushes, the grasses, the fruits, the vegetables that are recommended for Colorado. That's all online from the in my case, it's Colorado State University. The extension office is putting out all these fact sheets with all that information, and no doubt you can find that in Tennessee. So that would be the best way to get a recommended variety that you could expect to do in that area, is to see what they say in Tennessee is the kind of thing that you should be doing, and that way you'll have the best result. I think well, that I know that holds true with everywhere, and everybody has that recommendation. Like in the UK, it might be the Royal Horticultural Society, but there's some service that's going to be there to give you varieties that are recommended for a particular area. It's just finding that resource, but take advantage of it. And for sure, there's going to be something along those lines that you can find. Bowtie Life, Dave, thank you for that. Gardner Scott, thank you for your time today. And I fully appreciate the dedication to this community you show us all. Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. And I'm glad to see that we've made it almost through an entire show now. When I was sending myself an email from my computer here. So I always come and prep for the show and get everything going, and I do most of my work on my other computer, on my laptop. And so I went to send myself an email to remind myself after this show what I'm going to do on my laptop, and it didn't send. And I was like, what's up with that? And that's when my phone started dinging, and I looked down and I saw that I had lost my internet. And so it was so discouraging, because I love getting with you all every Monday to go through this. And And I thank you for talking about my dedication, but it's just because I love doing it. So I'm glad that it came back so quickly and that we've been able to spend this whole time together. And I'm very glad to see Yankee Sister Homestead back on the live stream. Always enjoy listening to you, Gardener Scott. Again, everyone be blessed. So I, I mentioned this a long time ago, but I had the incredible pleasure to go to Connecticut and to go to the Yankee Sister Homestead in person. So I still think about that trip a lot. And thank you so much for all the support you've given the channel for so long. And I got to talk to her daughters, and it was just an incredible experience. But it's been a while since we've seen you on. So know that you are always welcome, of course, like everyone is. But it's special when I get to say hello to you. So for today, thank you for making that extra little bit of our time together special. It's so nice. The opportunities that we have, I talk about going to the extension office and getting the fact sheets online, but it really is the face-to-face. It really is getting to know other gardeners and having those gardener discussions. Sean, who's on today, I've mentioned Sean is the president of our local garden club. And when we had our garden tour a few weeks ago, just standing in a garden and talking gardening is special. But to be standing in Sean's garden and talking about gardening in his garden was extra special. And then when Sean was standing in my garden talking about gardening, it just really doesn't get much better than that. So if you can, try to create that resource for yourself. Try to create that network of somebody that you can talk to about gardening, someone that you can visit, somewhere that you can go to rub elbows with other gardeners. It's just one of those special things that unless you're a gardener, you really don't understand. I feel guilty sometimes when I'm talking with a gardener friend, and that's all we talk about is gardening. It's like, we should be talking about our real lives, but really, gardening is our real life. And that's why so many of us are so passionate about it. So I hope that you all have somebody like that you can talk to face to face, elbow to elbow. But this is a nice complement to that, where we can get together on Mondays and we can share our time together and at least know that there are other gardeners like us who want to spend time on Mondays talking about gardening and asking questions and all the rest of the stuff we do. So I want to thank you sincerely for giving me this opportunity every Monday to get together. And I know that we all get something from it, which is what makes it so wonderful, that we can all meet up and talk and share. And of course, Jay Dixon, who is just such an incredible resource to keep this whole thing flowing as it's all happening, just makes it even more special. So on this special gardening day, I hope you can get out and get something done. The ground's not frozen yet. And even for those areas where the ground might still be pretty cold, it's warming. Plants are growing, birds are singing, the insects are flitting around our gardens. Get out there and enjoy it. That's what I'm planning to do. This looks to be a great week ahead for me in my garden. The temperatures are going to be nice. And I'm going to be back next Monday to probably talk about some of the things that I accomplished this garden week. And I hope you'll be with me next week. Same time, same channel, same wonderful group of people. Maybe we can get a few new ones added to the mix. Get out there. And of course, enjoy gardening. I'll see you then.